as a unique book. It's a book, but it's a road movie. And it's two women on the road from Canada to Mexico looking for action, and they find it, and one of them happens to be 90 years old, and the other one is her 60-year-old daughter, so, yeah.
57.
57, excuse me. She would be touchy about that wooden feather, yeah. She'd be extremely touchy. So welcome to Fling. And if you're a fan of books like 100 Years of Solitude or House of the Spirits, just one more thing that I'm sure Lily will be talking about. The dead in this book are very active. They're not just lying there. No spoiler alerts, though. Yeah. So it's a great book, great fun, and it's going to be a fun night. And I'm going to just read a quick thing from Louis Busby, who is an author and also professor of creative writing at USF, who says, in part, Fling is both hilarious and touching, the madcap journey of an aging mother and her adult daughter from cold Protestant Canada into the hallucinogenic heart of Mexico's magic, where the past literally comes to life. Every page is a surprise, a scintillating read. And for those of you who don't know this woman's bio, I've been asked to read the whole thing, and I'm happy to do it. A Canadian by birth, high school dropout, mother at 17. In her early years, Lily Mackenzie supported herself as a stock girl in Hudson's Bay Company, as a long-distance operator for the former Alberta government telephones, and as a secretary at Bechtel, which sponsored her into the States. She was also a cocktail waitress at the Fairmont in San Francisco. Briefly broke into the male-dominated world of the docks as a longshore person, and almost got her legs broken. You might want to ask her about that during the Q&A. This is one of the great bios. Trust me, I read a lot of bios. This one takes the cake. She also founded and managed a homeless shelter in Marin County, eventually earned 2 master's degrees. She's published reviews, interviews, short fiction, poetry, travel pieces, essays, and memoir in over 140 American and Canadian venues, and her poetry collection, All This, was published in 2011. And she also, in all of her spare time, teaches writing at the University of San Francisco, and is vice president of USF's part-time faculty union, and paints and travels with her husband, who is going to speak before we get to our main, our author tonight. So would you please welcome her husband, Michael.
So many facets in Lily's life, which you just heard about. And one of the great pleasures of being married for many years is to begin to appreciate and to love the many facets of your wife. Maybe the major theme of Lily's life is her almost religious devotion to writing. Lily writes every day, then rewrites, then revises, then rewrites the revisions, then revises every day. Right? That means every day, 7 days, 24 hours. In other words, writing is as natural to Lily as it is for characters in James Joyce. I teach Joyce, and in Finnegan's Wake he creates memorable characters, twins, Shem the penman, the writer, and his brother. Shem the penman, he secretes words, dirty words actually, out of his pores. And as the epidermal layer moves, more words. And he can't stop. I mean, it is a natural function that writing for Joyce, and I think really for Lily too, is as natural, and it's much a biological necessity really as sweating, or sleeping, or eating. And it's that leads to this and all of the things that she's made. Joyce also writes that writing is the recreation of life out of life. The transformation, imaginative transformation of sight, sounds, memories, important people in your life, making these things into art. What Lily's done is really to fashion out of her experiences a great comic creation, 90-year-old Bubbles and 57-year-old Feather. And what she's done is to create an unforgettably delightful character, and in fact timeless in her lust for life, Bubbles. Life begins out of life. You recreate life out of life, and this 90-year-old and this 57-year-old do recreate their lives out of lives. So here's their creator.
Well, you know, I've been doing something a little different. I started out this book tour in Canada, and at each one, just give me a minute while I get connected. Isn't this the word? If you're a Scot, you can stand and I will salute. Scotland the Brave, it's called. How many Scots in the room? How many almost Scots? You're almost. How many have been to Scotland? Wow, that's extraordinary. That's amazing. So goodbye to our piper. I had actually considered hiring a piper, and until I found out how much they charge. So then I found this music online and I borrowed it. But I called Book Passage to see if it would be okay to have a piper, you know, walk through the store.
What did they say?
She thought it would be great. Yeah. By the way, by now you know that I'm not Jonathan Franzen, right? He was here 2 nights ago, and I was hoping that some of his fans might spill over, that they might forget that it was Tuesday and think it was Thursday, and I might get some more people here. I also almost wore this flag, but I decided that might be a little bit too much, right? So, anyone recognize this flag? Mackenzie?
Scottish.
It is definitely Scottish. Yeah, heraldic lion there. So you get some feeling for the world that I grew up in. And what I'm going to try and give you is a little background on Fling, how it came to be that this Scottish world is so powerfully strong in me, and I hope it comes through in this book. So I grew up in a household where I heard my uncles, my Scottish uncles. So this is all on my mother's side. She was from Portree, Isle of Skye. The whole family was from Portree, Isle of Skye. And on my mother's side then, I had uncles, her brothers, I had my grandfather. And I would hear over and over this nostalgia for the old country, and how everything was wonderful in the old country, but not so good in Canada. And I also grew up with a lot of Scottish songs, and my mother was a great singer. I mean, not that she was a good singer, she sang a lot. She also did the Highland Fling too, and she actually did that quite wonderfully. But I just want to give you a taste for a little Scottish song other than the pipes. Have you ever heard? Whoops. This isn't what I want, Sir Harry Lauder. How many of you heard of Sir Harry Lauder?
Yeah.
Judy has. Oh, I'm so impressed. How do you know about him?
Let's see, my great-grandmother's second husband was a Scotsman, and he had a whole collection of
There you
Harry
go.
Lauder records.
There you go. There you go. And that's what
that I used to listen to on the big program.
you might. This is it. This is what I heard in my household. So here we are. A wee duck indoors means a redraft at the door. And so here is Harry Lauder. Come on, Harry. We're waiting for you. You're on, guy. Before we can go home, there's a wee wifey waiting, and a wee button thing. That's a house. It's a bright moonlit night. You're all right. You can. So this will give you some idea then. When I was about 8 years old, and I could say, it's a bright moonlit night tonight, which means, of course, it's a nice bright moonlight night tonight. I thought that I had made it as a Scot. So anyway, so with all of this in my background, how could I not write a book that included characters that began in this world? So let me tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book. I told you already that my mother and her brothers were originally from the Isle of Skye. Come in and have a seat. Yeah, welcome. We're just starting, so you're not even late. That's what I tell my students. Makes them feel less embarrassed. So anyway, so in the right before the First World War, my Scottish grandfather, who was a Scots schoolmaster, moved to Canada thinking that he was going to make, a real big splash. He didn't make a real big splash. But he did leave behind in Scotland his wife and his, it would have been 5 kids. So it was 7 years before they could join him in Canada because the war broke out and they couldn't then take any, ships across. So when the family finally did join him, it wasn't a happy occasion. He was kind of a bitter man, and he didn't treat my grandmother very well. I never knew her, I knew him. So after a year, she moved out. She left the kids, and she moved to a house in Mount Royal in Calgary, which is a very, upper class area. I don't know, she got something going with the owner of the house, whoever her boss was. And they left together, took a train to Mexico City. So after that, it's very blurry what happened. All I know really is that she died there, probably in her early 50s. And I think my mother claimed that the man dumped her, that he came back. I don't know. I have no idea what happened to her. But this story was with me all of my life, and I was fascinated. Who was this woman who out Nora in Dollhouse, right? Who was gutsy enough to take off from, and actually, I understand that my grandpa was kind of abusive with her, physically and verbally. So here we are. That's what started me on this book. I wanted to see if I could, make some discoveries about this grandmother. And of course, it took me to Mexico. So the book starts with Feather. You've heard now about 57-year-old Feather, who happens to live in the San Francisco Bay Area. She teaches art at a community college. It's her mother's 90th birthday. Her mother lives in Calgary, Canada. And Feather has gone back to Calgary to help her mother celebrate her 90th birthday. When she arrives, her mother announces that she's had a letter from the Mexico City Dead Letter Office asking her to pick up the ashes of her mother that had been left there 70 years earlier. Okay? So Feather thinks her mother's losing it and, sort of protests, doesn't want to take this trip. She's already had plans for her summer. She's going to go, she had planned to go to Puerto Vallarta for a week of R&R, and then she was going to go to San Miguel de Allende and take classes at the Art Institute. She was going to do research on the goddess, this was messing up her plans. But finally, Bubbles was convincing enough that Feather agreed to take her. But first they had to go to Puerto Vallarta. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading from the book tonight. I'm going to read 3 brief passages. I'm hoping, of course, you'll have a chance to read the book yourselves, and who wants to have someone else read to you if you're going to read it yourself. But here we are. We're in Puerto Vallarta, and they happen to be in this wonderful penthouse apartment that overlooks Madera Bay, and the waves are crashing in, and it's a beautiful location. So that night, an orange-colored crescent moon hangs suspended in the sky as if from a string. Feather and Bubbles are sitting on the balcony sipping piña coladas. The pelicans glide past in formation. Bubbles reaches out a free hand trying to touch them, but they continue on course and dive into the sea. The women shift their gaze to the horizon, its line broken occasionally by ghostly ships passing by. The image reminds Feather that she's in Mexico, the land where the dead live on. Like the Scots, many Mexicans assume there's more to reality than what can be discerned through their limited vision. Magic and reality coexist. The Day of the Dead is a major national celebration. Memories of an early Halloween fill Feather with nostalgia. So she says to Bubbles, do you recall that Halloween I dressed as a bumblebee? Bubbles, you always had an odd taste in clothes. Feather, I wanted to go out trick-or-treating, but you made me wait till we tried the Ouija board. Is it Ouija? Ouija? Ouija. Whatever. She mimics her mother's gestures. You said, look, dear, we can use it to talk to the dead. Granny and Granda believe they're nearer to humans on All Hallows Eve. They roam the earth then, looking for relatives. Bubbles slurps the last of her piña colada. I said that? What a memory you have. Feather, remember what happened then? Bubbles frowns, trying to recall. You asked the board if your mother was nearby. Bubbles said, I did? You sure did. I closed my eyes and our hands began moving as if someone were lightly guiding them. When I opened my eyes, the planchette had moved to beneath the word, yes. Bubbles leans forward in her chair. What happened then? Our fingers flew over the board, picking out letters. You jotted them down, but you couldn't make out what the words were. They were in another language. Una cerveza, por favor. Oh, I remember now. She was talking Spanish. I knew it was Mother then. What was she saying? She wanted a beer. Feather doesn't care for a beer, but she could use a smoke. She takes her empty glass into the kitchen and sets it in the sink. Then she opens the fridge, grabs her bag of grass, rolls a joint, lights up, and returns to the balcony, sucking the smoke deep into her lungs. She slides into her chair, the joint already working its magic, making her limbs feel liquid. Resting her head against the chair back, she focuses on the peaks that shelter Madera's Bay. Maybe Granny's spirit is part of Sierra Madres now, Feather says dreamily. It means the mothers, you know. They're the mountains you see all around here. She waves her hand and then watches it float down to her lap. But Bubbles' eyes have closed. Her mouth falls open. Her head nods, and she begins to snore. Softly at first, but then at full force. The shrill sound gets drowned in the thundering surf. Feather gets up and covers her with a light throw. Then she leans over and brushes her forehead with her lips. The first time in ages she's done so. So I'm going to continue a little bit more of this Puerto Vallarta section. So the next morning, Bubbles preens in front of the mirror in her room, wearing her new dress, preparing for the bus trip Feather has arranged into the jungle. Light cotton, the color of tea with cream in it, floats over her skin, caressing it. She doesn't wear a girdle or slip under it. Too hot for underclothes, she insists, almost skipping her panties and bra as well until Feather says, "No way, Mom, you'll drive the men crazy." Bubbles laughs. The sensual feel of the dress fabric distracts her from what's going on in her belly, making her aware of the heat that's been building between her legs. It's been a long time since she's wanted sex. Mexico has awakened the urge again. When she and Feather step out of the condo, a dozen native Mexican men rush up and bow in front of Bubbles. Now, I have to give you a tiny bit of a spoiler. Bubbles happens to resemble an ancient goddess that these men are familiar with. So this is sort of a subtext here. Okay, I'm sorry if I spoiled that for you. But, so here, this will explain part of what's happening, but Bubbles doesn't realize this. So these native Mexican men rush up and bow in front of Bubbles. "Señora, señora, para usted," and they wave things in front of her, mangoes and papayas and even some jewelry made from seashells. "We just want to touch you, señora. Por favor, it brings luck." Some of the men kneel in front of her, kissing the hem of her skirt. She giggles and coyly does a little dance step, tipping over a little, the weight of her shoulder bag pulling her off balance. Feather catches her before the men can, pulling her back inside the entrance. "What's gotten into them? You think you're a goddess or something. No one even notices me." Bubbles smiles graciously, steps outside, and holds out her right arm. But Feather grabs her. "For Pete's sake, don't encourage them. They'll never leave. You're the one who always said, give them an inch, they'll take a mile." Bubbles pulls away from Feather and stuffs the gifts into her new hand-woven shoulder bag. "I wasn't talking about men. It was those French Canadians you were hanging out with." There's a lot of, prejudice in Western Canada against French Canadians, I'm sorry to say. They're out for all they can get. "You're such a bigot, Mom." "I know I put on weight, but you don't have to rub it in." "I'm just trying to protect you. This isn't Canada, you've got to be careful." Bubbles glares at Feather. "You're too suspicious." "Maybe they're looking for a mother," Bubbles says. "Maybe they're not." She follows Feather out of the condo complex, avoiding the men and almost stumbling over a wiry, brown-skinned gringo on the sidewalk. He's wearing only shorts, his body tied into knots in a yoga position. Legs wound behind his head, long fingers tapping on the concrete next to his tin cup. He indicates he wants money. Bubbles looks away. She's never seen anything like it in her life. Feather does yoga, and Bubbles has tried it herself. She can do the mountain. You know what the mountain is? You just stand. But she's never seen someone make a pretzel of himself before, and all for money. Well, he won't get any of hers. She bounces past, eyes averted. So I'm just going to read one more brief passage. They do reach Mexico City eventually, and Feather is wanting to go to the National Anthropology Museum, takes her mother with her, and so they're walking toward the museum entrance when Bubbles stops, staring, her eyes bugging out at a massive statue standing there, as high as a 2-story building. Its stocky shape is reflected in the pond beneath it. Everything in this city overwhelms her. The boulevards take half a day to cross, people throng the streets, and now this, a sculpture that looms over them like a dark cloud, blotting out the sky and absorbing everything around it. She can't walk past and ignore it. It shouts, "Look at me." In fact, the whole city reaches out and grabs her. Murals clamoring from walls of public buildings, vendors' booths creating splashes of color everywhere. She reaches over and dips her fingers into the pond, touching the statue's image reflected there, wiping her hand on her dress. For once in her life, she's almost speechless. "Holy smoke," she said, "where did it come from?" Feather reads the plaque next to the statue. It's called Talak. "What's that mean?" "What's what mean?" "The lock." "You mean Talak, haven't a clue, comes from Quetzalcoatl. Wow, it weighs 168 tons. It's the pre-Hispanic rain god everyone used to worship." Bubbles doesn't understand much of what Feather is saying. Rain gods, Hispanic, the words sound foreign. All she can do is stare. "Look, Mom, the Quetzalcoatl villagers didn't want the statue removed. They thought the rains would stop and their lives would end. It looks like it's standing in its own pee. Do you think it caused the storm the other night?" "Could be," Feather says. "The night they brought the rain god to the city, they had the heaviest storm ever recorded at that time of year." She just nods her head, mouth hanging open, eyes riveted on the statue, waiting for pee to spout forth. Feather takes her arm and nudges her toward the entrance. "Come on, Mamacita, there's lots more to see." They enter the first section, the Olmec period. Bubbles gets irritated with Feather, who stops for long periods in front of the glass cases that hold the ancient art and artifacts. Some of it reminds her of the modern stuff she's seen in Feather's studio. It gives her a stomach ache and gas. At least she thinks it's the art that's causing her pain. She doesn't know how Feather can stare at it for hours. It must have an effect on her mind. Bubbles' head hurts after she's been around it for a while. Such mumbo jumbo. "I'm going to wait out here for you, dear," she says, pointing to the benches in the courtyard. So, you'll have to read the book to find out what happens next. So, I've invited someone who's been a longtime friend. We taught together at this former wonderful liberal arts college. We met there, actually, World College West. Anyone remember World College West? Yes. Yes, a few of us do. Anyway, Victoria Damara and I met there, and Victoria read Fling in a very early manuscript form. And so she's going to come up and interview me. She has a few questions she wants to ask, and then we'll open this up to you guys if you have any questions too. Okay, Victoria.
Good evening, Lily. Who knew at World College West we were going to end up here?
I know.
This is a real pleasure. Lily has completed not one, but 4 novels in the time since I've met her. And one of the things that constantly amazes me is that she's finished them all, had continual faith in herself as a writer, in what she was writing. They're all roughly about, well, one is longer, but around 250, 300 pages. And she no sooner stops one, sometimes before she's even finished one, she has an idea for the next. So I second heartily what Michael said. I know writing is, I don't think you could stop writing until you stop breathing, but I applaud the wonderful work you're doing, and exciting. So this is a story, besides being a humorous novel in many ways, it's also the story of abandonment and reconciliation, as well as flinging yourself into and onto the universe. I'm going to talk to you mainly about women and sex.
Okay, go for it, girl.
So there's a lot of judgment going on in this novel, in the story about 4 generations of women who go against society's mores. Part of their resistance is cultural and part of it is individual. So we have the great-grandmother of Feather, Annie MacDonald, who, like many Scots Highlanders and maybe many Scots in general, are not entirely Christian. So despite Presbyterian pressures, they go their own way. And some of it is individual. All the Heathers, and there are 3 of them in this book, have children at a very young age, as teenagers, and in challenging circumstances. So these themes continue to run throughout the book about women who go their own ways and the trouble they run into. So what would you comment about, what hope do you have? What would you like readers to take away with them about women?
You go, girl.
You go, girl. Thank you. Exactly. What would I like? I mean, when I was exploring these characters, of course, the common theme among all of them is they were free spirits. And they were adventuresome. And I know that when I was growing up, that world wasn't as open to me as it is now for most young women, at least in this culture. So what do I want people to take away from this is that here we have a 57-year-old and a 90-year-old, and they're still able to grow, they're still able to realize their dreams, they're still able to make things happen, they still enjoy life. Old age doesn't knock them out of the picture. So I don't know if it's necessarily just about women, I think it's about any of us. But it happens to be these particular women, these particular characters that Victoria's referring to.
Bubbles, over and over, and Bubbles is, as you've already figured out, is major trouble for Feather. Their relationship has been contentious, but they love each other as well. And one of the things that I noticed was that Bubbles, over and over, she tells us, and herself, about all the things she could have been. She could have been a famous poet herself. I could have been a goddess if I put my mind to it. I could have been a doctor wearing whites, a teacher telling her student things, the Queen of England telling off the French-Canadian separatists. I could have given birth to Jesus. And my favorite, I could have been Esther Williams. So she lives in a kind of a fantasy life, a bubble, about what could have been. And one of the things that interests me is that she never includes any of the things that she actually excelled at in her long life. Things that she became good at by dint of necessity and practice, like cooking and sewing and gambling. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about that character and that, just who she is, because those contrasts are very large throughout the novel.
Bubbles, who thinks she could have been a contender.
Yeah.
And the other Bubbles, who
Right.
is actually so accomplished.
Yeah, what she's accomplished at is life. She's accomplished at not letting life squash her. She's accomplished at not letting her curiosity leave her. And so she's going to be open to whatever happens. So how many 90-year-olds do you know who would go to Mexico for the first time? No. But this character did, and she embraced it fully. Yeah, I mean, I think she's a real life force. She didn't have to do anything. She just was who she is, and that is someone who lived life to the fullest extent that she was able to. And really, I think, became, in a certain sense, a goddess figure even though she wasn't really a goddess, and even though these villagers had it wrong, in a certain way she was.
Let's see where we want to go from there. In the, there's a lot of sex in this book.
Oh, come on. Once a week.
Okay. All I mean by that is that all the characters, the women in particular, are lustful about life, and as was mentioned at the beginning, they're looking for some action and they get it. And in a later section of Fling, one of your characters requires the services of a shaman. The one this character finds engenders a burst of erotic attraction. And the scene is a really fascinating one. The shaman is doing his work, surrounded by chanting Indians, and this character is becoming rapturous about the shaman, at which point she remarks to herself that she feels like singing herself, only the song she wants to sing is a song by the Platters that many of us may remember, Twilight Time. So I was trying to imagine her singing Twilight Time with the Indian chanting. And she's then taking in the shaman's legs, which are gorgeous. This character has a particular thing about them. And she says, he has such muscular calves and slender ankles, and she's hot for this man. It must be the final stage surge of passion before her hormones take a permanent vacation. So I'm struck by a technique that's very interesting, where there may be some erotic or lustful description that's beautiful, and then it's kind of sidesteps towards humor. I wonder if you talk about that as technique or intent, and did you work for Twilight Time, or did it just pop in your mind?
Well, ask Michael, I sing to him all the time. Twilight Time is one of the favorite songs.
Lily knows every word of every important song, literally.
No, I don't.
I mean, you do, and she'll just come out with everything.
So sex and humor and Twilight Time, I think sex is funny. I mean, it's hilarious what animals do with each other. We're animals. How can you not laugh at it? I mean, if you don't, I think there's something wrong. The humor, I'll admit, it took me a while to find the voice for this book, meaning that I started this book in 1999, and I was struggling to figure out how to approach this grandmother. How was I going to write this book? I don't know if you've ever heard of the Canadian writer Jane Urquhart, but I had just read her lovely family saga, Away, and it was a beautiful lyrical novel. And so I thought I was going to write something like, I was trying to write something like that, but it didn't work because these characters don't fit into that kind of a world. And then I realized, wait a minute, these are funny characters. This is a zany situation. And so I had to pull out all the stops. And so once you have established a tone for a novel or for a work, you have to stay with that. So I couldn't all of a sudden pull back and have her be ultra serious about this sexual encounter with Don Miguel, the shaman. But it's serious. I mean, I think it's described well. Did I answer your question, Victoria?
It was pretty close.
I'm struck by also, it's a family of 4 generations where there are actually some, despite all the fun, there are a lot of serious issues, a lot of abandonment, as I said in the beginning. And Feather and her mother were at odds often about their version of history, about what her mother has done and why, what Feather has been forced to do because of her mother's actions. But you have profound compassion for these characters, and I guess I would like you to talk a little bit about what enables you to, how do families heal their hurts? Because you're talking, you came from your own family where the grandmother had abandoned her family and where families were separated for very serious reasons and then go with high hopes and then find themselves in a very untenable and awful situation and can't go home again.
Well, writers are lucky. How many writers are there in the room? There's a few, I know, yeah. So one of the amazing things we're able to do is we're able to enter other lives. And in doing that, I guess it's a little bit like therapists or analysts. In doing that, you're able to imagine something that you otherwise wouldn't have experienced yourself. So in writing the book, I needed to explore as many dimensions of these characters as I could in order to try and understand why they ended up the way they did. So I think that's where compassion comes from. It comes from being able to understand what causes people to act the way they do. And sometimes they don't have any choice over what they do because they're living something out from the past, as a lot of the characters in this book are. So, yeah, so that's where, for me, the compassion comes from.
Especially given what you said before, that your mother had the story that she understood from her mother was that, or about her mother, was that she'd been abandoned in Mexico, and without going into that, you approached that from a different point of view. But it's a striking thing to me about, I think, reconciling mothers and daughters is really hard. I mean, how many novelists kill off the mother before they even start? You know, it's a kind of given that mothers, it's very hard, and you've got nothing but a mother and daughter crunched together. So
Yeah.
I admire it. Did Lily Barbara ever get to read any of Fling? Your mother?
Do you know what? This is funny. Of course, you know, characters start someplace, and Bubbles did start in some ways from my mother, but once a writer starts writing, the character is no longer whatever, you know, the person is, but becomes something else, as Michael pointed out in his introduction. So years ago, Mom was visiting, and I was still working on an early portion of Fling, and I did have a chapter that I gave to her to read. I was curious to see if she would recognize anything of herself in it. Well, Mom was a little out to lunch. And, you know, she read it, and she said, oh, this is really great, but I'm not sure that she really understood it. You know, I think she read the words. Once she came to visit me when I lived in Marin County, and there was this, she was impressed with all the books I had, I think, because she didn't go beyond high school, and there was this big fat sociological study I had, La Vida, I think it was called. So while she was there visiting, she sat and she went through that book, and then she finished it, and so, you know, I did it. I don't think she understood a single word, but it was, you know, for her it was a symbol. It was, you know, she could also do that as well.
Well, I think well, I was, maybe I'll end with, and
Yeah,
want to
right,
turn it over
yeah.
to the people. On this beautifully designed cover, there are words that march around the edge that read, a madcap journey of an aging mother and her adult daughter from cold Protestant Canada into the hallucinogenic heart of Mexico's magic. Would it be fitting, do you think, to consider Fling a lighthearted romp?
Well, there's something a little pejorative about lighthearted, and certainly it has its light moments and its humor, but and it's certainly a romp. But if you read it and you don't also see the seriousness in it, then I'll be disappointed. Thank you, Victoria. So this, we're going to open it up. If anyone else has any questions, whether you have read or not read the book, anything about the book or writing, or I have a question first though. You know, I'm a teacher and I give quizzes to my students, so just pretend you're my students for a minute. So I would like to ask, why do you guys read? Why do you read?
Gonna be on the final.
It'll be on the final. Don't get out of the room until you answer the question.
I read to go places I've never been, to go to eras I've never experienced myself, to see what the inside workings of people's minds are like.
Super. Absolutely. Other people, yes.
It varies tremendously. Like, I read sometimes for escape. I read sometimes for enlightenment. I'm reading a book about Amsterdam because I just came back from Amsterdam, and I want to learn about another side of Amsterdam that I didn't know before. And sometimes I read because it relates to my life.
Yes.
Or I read in reading your book, which leads into a question.
Okay.
Back at the teacher. I think Bubbles is a terrific comic character. And I'm not saying that she's just a comic character.
Yeah.
But when I use that term, I use it very positively and not lightheartedly. I mean, I think she's a great creation.
Right.
And so I wondered how, so part of what holds me with your book is Bubbles. And because I love terrific comic characters. I love laughing when I read a book. And I wondered how much of that is Lily?
Well, I don't know anyone else who wrote it who's here.
Well, I think you have a great sense of humor, because I think you created a very, very humorous, I'm not saying she's just humorous.
No, I know. Yeah.
But you created a great humorous character.
Yeah. Thank you. I do have a sense of humor. I mean, how do you get through life if you don't have one? Come on. I suspect everyone here has a great sense of humor. So yeah, I mean, it's part of me too. Absolutely. Yeah. So more why you read. Anyone else want to take that on? Yes, Kathy.
I think I like the complexity of uncovering human nature.
The complexity of uncovering human nature.
And when characters are presented, there are different dimensions. That things aren't so summed up so easily.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, Jackie.
Well, I read the same way you write because I have to. And so it must have been ingrained from childhood, and I think it's human nature to fall for a story. I think we need stories in our lives.
Right. We've done it since the beginning of time.
Yes,
Yeah.
and essentially it's as simple as that.
Yes. Anyone else want to add to our list of why you read? Anything we haven't dealt with? Eva.
I love other women's stories. I love delving into women's experiences. I've fallen into a place where I'm reading a lot of women's experiences, and I think that it just opens my eyes to kind of alternate worlds and experiences.
Yes. Bernie?
I really, in addition to what other people have said, am just so admiring people who can convey so much with so little. You know, and develop a character and show, you can really get into the heart of a human being from words.
Yes, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? It is amazing. George?
I think that for me, I was the youngest of 5, and when I learned to read, I could enter into my own world and experience other worlds.
Yes.
And I did read some fact, but fiction was just fascinating,
Yeah.
and it still is. And so it's wonderful what you've done, is to take all these things and put it together and make fiction for us.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add? So you've answered, yes, Kathy?
Well, I think there's an intimacy with the book that is like no other form
Yes.
of receiving information
Yes.
or story. It's just you and the book.
And the author.
And the author.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a dialogue that
Yes.
goes on
Yeah.
between you and the author.
Or a trialogue, or, I don't know. Yeah, it gets a little crazy. So you guys have just answered the question that most writers get asked, why do you write? You just answered the question, okay? So, does anyone have any other questions?
What's next, Lily?
What is next? What is next? Well, I have another novel coming out next year, Bone Songs. I can't seem to get away from Mexico. In this book, the main character is Mexican, and she's a larger-than-life woman. She's over 6 foot tall, and also very lusty, very amoral. I wanted to create a character that was amoral. And she ends up in a place, tiny little town called Weed, Alberta, and she shakes things up. Her name? Curva Pelagrosa. If you speak Spanish, you know it's dangerous curves, okay? Other questions? Yes, Deborah.
I know we share some very good friends who are writers, Victoria and Shelley and others. And I wonder, in this process of writing, their feedback on manuscripts, commentary, working with other people, how helpful, I don't mean particularly in terms of this or that person's response, but in a process, how helpful or not is that, do you think?
Well, here is Susan. I met her tonight for the first time. We've been part of an online writing group that I started, 10 years ago. We were all graduates from San Francisco State's creative writing program. And we still have a nucleus, and every couple of weeks someone submits, 20 pages, and we give each other feedback. Yeah, it is nice. And I don't know how I would manage as a writer if I didn't have that kind of sophisticated feedback from sophisticated readers and writers, so that I can then take another look at these characters. When Michael said that I write, I rewrite, I revise, I rewrite the revision. This is the writing process. My students never believe me when I say, the heart of writing is revision. But that's what writers do, and you just keep doing it until finally everything's eventually gels, you hope. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank some people. Eva Zimmerman is my stepdaughter. She is a publicist at Seal Press, and she's given me a tremendous amount of help in letting the world know that Fling exists. Vin and Judy, great friends, and look, pros, real pros. This will end up on YouTube. You'll be famous. My husband, who puts up with this habit that I have, and not only puts up with it, but supports it. Pennell Publishing, a wonderful little press in Fayetteville, Arkansas. They have been superb to work with, real pros, really on top of things, and I can't thank them enough for taking a chance with Fling. Book Passage, thanks to independent bookstores and this particular independent bookstore for the gift that it gives this community to have events like this, workshops, etc., to promote the reading and writing life. Yeah. And then thanks to all of you for coming. I really, really appreciate taking time out of your lives most of you know me. A couple people wandered in who don't know me, and I really appreciate you attending. There is lots of wine left. There are lots of snacks. I'm hoping that you will take some with you because I don't particularly want to have to take everything home. So